All right. Thank you very much, Azim, and thank you for the invitation to speak here during this conference. And also, congratulations to 20 years of service. It's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Let me spend a little bit of time to talk about guiding standards, and you mentioned that in your introduction, Azim, and how can they be helpful when we talk about private sector innovation, public sector innovation, and even more specifically, innovation related to government and government agencies. So I'll try to do that in the context of the next decade of innovation. Just first, very briefly about me. I've been working with standardization for over a decade now, from the Swedish Institute for Standards perspective, and taking part in the international standardization. So I've kind of been following this development for quite some time now. I'm also an advisor working with large companies, an adjunct professor in the area of innovation management, because I do think that when we are practicing innovation management, it should be grounded in research. I also have a background in private sector, working for Ericsson headquarters here in Stockholm, Sweden. So that's a little bit about my background. When you're going to look forward, you also need to look backward. And we do see that innovation management has very often fallen short of expectations when it comes to different types of organizations. We see several studies, and this is just one of them by McKinsey, that innovation is high on the agenda. And this last year, with all the things that has happened, innovation is even more important on many organizations' agenda. But when you ask this second question, how satisfied are you with your innovation performance? Most organizations say that they are not. They could do a better job in driving innovation activities more effectively. And in this case, 94% are dissatisfied with their innovation performance. Now, if we look deeper into this, there are many reasons for that. And just one reason is that we're trying to deal with innovation one piece at a time. So we pick up one of all these things and we do that, and we're not getting the likely results. We're maybe running hackathons, maybe we're using an agile process, maybe we're focusing on open innovation, and so on. And innovation efforts are complex. We need to do several things to make innovation happen, not just episodic events and so on. So what we really need to do to be able to drive innovation efforts effectively, to lead and organize in a good way in any organization, we need to take a systems view. So that is really the context for my presentation here today. So my proposal here for the next decade of innovation is actually two important things are happening. We are seeing the emergence of guiding standards, common frameworks to help us drive innovation efforts more effectively in all types of organizations, so that we will close the gap from expectations and outcome, as I showed in the beginning. Another important part is not only the frameworks, but also the people that are going to lead us to do this work. So in the next decade, we will also see an emerging profession. We call them innovation management professionals. These are people that are skilled in managing innovation projects. And since innovation is becoming more and more important, not the least for government and government agencies, these two things are critical for innovation to happen in the next 10 years. Let me talk a little bit about both of these two, because they are interconnected and both are really necessary, and we need to look at both these trends, starting with guiding standards. And As soon as we're mentioning standards in the context of innovation, there is always a clash. How can we standardize creativity and so on? Those are the questions that you're getting. However, I'd like you to think about this as not a standard for creativity, but a framework to remove the barriers and to create the best possible conditions. So that is really the key here. Can we help organizations in a systematic and systemic way to create the best possible conditions for innovation to happen? That's what the guidance standard is all about. The guidance frameworks that we're talking about here, and they're called innovation management system, that's really the key word here. They are designed for all types of organizations. So it's very important that we're not only thinking private sector companies here, we're also thinking public sector companies, government agencies are very much the target for these frameworks. And you can even think of it as a simple form of a checklist. What do I need to think about when I want to increase and build the capability for innovation in a particular organization? The interesting thing with these frameworks is that they have not been developed by a single person or a consultant and so on. It's a joint international effort that has been going on for the last 12 years actually. And it's been done in the context of ISO, the International Organization for Standardization. Many countries have been participated from all continents all over the world. About 50 to 60 countries, including some international organization. For example, the OECD, the World Trade Organization, has been involved in this endeavor. And this is a new thing, even if some of us have been doing this for quite some time in working in developing these guiding standards. The first one was published about a year ago. So these are new things, and it'll take some time before they are picked up and being implemented and used and so on. And I'm not going to go into the details what exactly are inside an innovation management system. Just going to show you a very kind of high level graphic or icon here showing the different elements. And just talk about that the main part is the innovation processes that you can see in the center of this image, moving from intention to realized value in the end. So looking at the entire innovation process from maybe, first idea to maybe address a common mission until there's actually something that creates value for different stakeholders, for citizens, for users, or for customers in the end. So that is the end-to-end process that we would like to facilitate and make as smooth as possible by removing barriers and creating the best possible conditions. And we do that by looking at the context of the organization, what is happening around the organization, the leadership, in terms of a leadership commitment to innovation, strategy, and so on, moving into planning, setting the objectives and the measurements in place. And also, if you look below the processes, there's a lot of support. You need the people, the money, the time, and so on in place for these innovation processes to happen. So just a quick snapshot of what's inside an innovation management system that has been developed by ISO for some time now. Think of an innovation management system similar to the operating system of a smartphone, for example. It keeps all the different parts together and makes sense of them so that they're all talking the same language and that they are easily accessible. That's how you should think of a management system for innovation or an innovation management system. The systems approach is very important because, as I said before, efforts to drive innovation has been fragmented in the past. If we take a systems perspective, we realize that the whole system is not stronger than its weakest link. So we are now able to look at all the factors that are necessary to make innovation happen. And we can look for where is the bottleneck right now, where do we have the gaps and then we can address them. But we can only do that if we take the systems perspective. So that is really what is new about this approach. and what we should bring with us to our organizations. Very important here is that this is an international and collaborative effort. As I mentioned, that also makes the framework more legitimate than should it come from, let's say, one organization that came up with it. There are many frameworks out there. This is the one that is most credible and most legitimate, and that can be used by governments and by other organizations to forward their innovation agendas everywhere. One key feature here is that if we have an organization that already have other management systems in place, for example, for quality, for environment, and so on, the management system for innovation is fully compatible. They are fitting perfectly together. So this would be an addition to an organization's quality management system, for example, so that you can also focus on renewal and innovation. And there are actually, or there will be in the future, two types of standards. And Azim, you talked about ISO 56002. That is the guidance standard. In the future, there will also be a requirement standard, which will be called ISO 56001, so that you can get certified as an organization for having this management system in place. There's some key documents here that are important to look at. And here you can see kind of the main frameworks that are interesting at this point. In the middle, you see ISO 56002. That is the description of the innovation management system. On one side, you have 56000, an interesting document that holds the terminology. It's important to have a common language to know what we are talking about when it comes to innovation, because there are so many definitions, so many understandings out there. So there has been an effort to put that together in the framework and provide the fundamentals. So that will be a key document. That also includes the innovation management principles that I'm going to show right after this. On the right-hand side is the innovation management capabilities assessment. And we just talked about in the conversation here previously about readiness assessments and so on. This is a document produced by the Swedish Standards Institute that is actually doing just that, related and directly connected to the ISO 56002. Just take a quick look at the innovation management principles. They're also quite useful and quite interesting. These are the principles behind innovation management and also the success factors for making innovation happen. So just a few highlights here. Future-focused leaders are important in your organization. Culture is another factor that is also important, both for creativity and for implementation, to actually drive the ideas all the way to the market. And finally, just another highlight from these principles, managing uncertainty. And that's what Soraya talked about initially, the drive for experimentation, to create your own data. Because we're innovating, we're doing something new, and there is no knowledge. We don't know where we're going to end up. So we need systematic processes to be able to manage uncertainty and to create our own data. So that's, and there are more of them, and we could talk about that as well. This is a snapshot of the assessment framework, the readiness assessment, if you will, and it pinpoints all the key elements of the innovation management system. So you will be able to do a 360 assessment. What capabilities do you have in place in your organization, and what can you do to improve them? Just very quickly show that there's a lot of standardization activities going on. You can see all the purple ones here are standards that are published in the 56000 series. This is work that's going on, and this is also a kind of work that everybody is invited. So it's possible to join these international committees and work with these standards. And as you can see, under development, or development will start soon, that is ISO 56001. It'll take a few years before that one is ready. What we have already now is, for example, tools and methods for innovation partnerships, for assessment, and for intellectual property management. Those are the standards that are already published. Just have a few more points to make related to this other factor, this other trend, and that is the emerging profession. In the next decade, we will see innovation management professionals becoming more prominent, trained, and effective in our organizations. If we look at emerging professions generally, we see that every profession is kind of moving through a maturity curve, starting from being very ad hoc to become very mature, where you have all the, let's say, the tools, the training programs, and the expectations, and so on are in place. And this is just an example of previous professions that has been moving through this curve. Project managers, for example, quality managers have all been moving through this professionalization. Now we're talking about the individual, not the organization. This is the maturity of individuals and the profession that individuals can hold. And we're seeing that the profession of innovation management is starting to mature. But it'll take a while until it's widespread and widely acknowledged and so on. But it's important that we are supporting this movement forward. And there are a couple of elements to this professional model that I'd like to point out. A job description, a body of knowledge, training programs, competence development, and also personal certification, not organizational certification. In this case, this is a personal certification. Let me just talk about some of these things one by one. The job description outlines the different parts of what are the responsibilities of an innovation management professional. For example, develop strategies around critical missions, if we're talking about a government agency, for example, designing the processes to reach those goals, provide the tools and methods, coach the individual projects, the teams, facilitate collaboration with the ecosystem, and also making sure that we can change and promote the culture of innovation inside that particular agency. So these are the key tasks of a professional in innovation management. To their help, there is a body of knowledge. In the Swedish context, we just published the first version of the body of knowledge. It includes the guidance standards, so it's built on the international foundation, but it's developed by the community of practitioners. So this is something that comes from the profession. This is open, freely available, and it's possible to get, and I'll make sure that you will have the links and so on, so you can go and access this, should you be interested in this. Based on the body of knowledge, there's also training programs, and there's several of them. This is an example of the program we are providing at Amplify. That's our consulting company. And this program is for professionals, both for beginners and for experienced ones. It focuses on the systematic and the systemic application of innovation management. This is designed to prepare for personal certification, and there are programs coming up next year. Should anyone be interested, I'd be happy to answer some questions around that. Well, we do believe that this is a very important part of the model to provide training for professionals. And if you have work experience, it is possible also to get a personal certification, which is done by a different organization. In Sweden, it is RISE, the certification arm of RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden, that is doing this. This is an independent certification process. Certification could be interested in order to strengthen the profession, actually move up that maturity curve, create a job market for professionals, and also quality assurance for the employer. And this is also an area where we could see government stepping in, actually promoting or even subsidizing training and personal certification of professionals in this area. So to sum it up, there are two key things that I believe will happen in the next decade of innovation, and that we really need to pay attention to, not the least from a government perspective: the emergence of guidance standards and the emerging profession. How can we support that? How can we use that in addressing innovation activities going forward into the future? I do know that I have, I think I have reached the end of the presentation. Let me just say that if we're looking at this slide as a conclusion, that I do think that governments need to pay careful attention to this, because these frameworks and the profession will be critical for government and government agency to do two things. First one is for their own innovation activities. We could call that policy innovation, for devising effective policies and to innovate. We talked about anticipatory innovation, for example. You need to be deeply grounded into the innovation processes, manage uncertainty, and so on, to be able to do that effectively. So both these trends can help and will help government to do policy innovation. The second area, which is important, is innovation policy. When governments are thinking about how can they make sure that the ecosystem around them, public companies, small, medium-sized enterprises, and so on, are innovating effectively, they can promote the use of guidance standard, and they can promote and even subsidize the development of professionals to actually leverage these two trends in the ecosystem, in industry in general, and also in other types of organization. So I do think that these two trends holds the promise for governments and all other types of organizations to innovate better in the future. So by that, thank you very much, and over to you, Azim.